Let's in fact start this broadcast by taking you straight to Tel Aviv, where the people of Israel have taken to the streets to protest against their incumbent Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They are holding up posters and they are chanting slogans demanding that Netanyahu should step down immediately, because they've said that the reason why Israel has suffered the biggest attack since its formation by any Palestinian faction is because of the lax nature of Benjamin Netanyahu and also his attitude of hubris, which resulted in the intelligence failure. The people are demanding for the immediate release of hostages that are being held by Hamas. Now, for week after week, remember, Benjamin Netanyahu had been extremely unpopular amongst the people of Israel, where people had turned out in large numbers against his judicial overhaul that he had been attempting. But now, this is what people are talking about him. They are describing Benjamin Netanyahu's government as a destruction government. They're saying that there needs to be some accountability for the monumental lapse in the intelligence and a monumental lapse in military intelligence that resulted in the most serious incursion by any Palestinian faction in the last 70 years. Now, Israel has lost more than 1,300 people, many of them soldiers, many of them civilians. And now people are saying that Benjamin Netanyahu should do the thing that is morally correct. He should step down because he has failed for the very job for which he was elected, and that is protecting the people of Israel. The people of Israel are saying that Benjamin Netanyahu will not last after this crisis.
והצבא עסוק עכשיו בלחימה. אנחנו צריכים לחזק את ידיו כדי להשיב לנו את מעמדנו, את ההרתעה שלנו ואת השלום הבסיסי של אזרחי המדינה. דבר אחד בכל זאת אני אומר.
All right, now to give us more perspective at this moment in terms of the crisis that has actually broken out at this moment between Israel and Hamas, and also the many aspects at this moment that are unfolding in the state of Israel, we're being joined by Mr. Jonathan Wattel, who's the former Director of Communications and Senior Policy Advisor at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations. He is joining us live from New York. Now, Mr. Wattel, what we are witnessing at this moment, in this crisis that has broken out ever since Hamas carried out that incursion into Israel, which resulted in deaths of at least about 1,300 people, is this relentless campaign of air raids by the state of Israel. Gaza Strip at this moment is under a complete stage of blockade. People are running short of food, water and electricity supplies. And the United Nations has said that what is unfolding at the moment in the Gaza Strip is a humanitarian disaster. How bad is the situation in the Gaza Strip?
Look, the situation is quite dire there. The situation in Israel is alarming as well. We have a situation in which about 200 Israeli soldiers were killed, and the remaining are civilians, men, women, and children and babies, slaughtered by Hamas militants who managed to infiltrate into Israel and cause such death and destruction that then has led to the Israeli response. We have a situation in which well over 100 Israeli citizens are being held in the Gaza Strip by the Hamas militants. And their whereabouts is unknown, and how many are still alive is unknown. And as a result of this, of course, the Israeli military has taken action to try to squash Hamas and try to do something about liberating the Israeli hostages who happen to be citizens of other nations as well. So we do have an absolutely horrible situation in which we are seeing civilian casualties on both sides, continued Hamas rocket attacks and Islamic Jihad rocket attacks falling into Israel, Hezbollah jumping into this and firing rockets in exchange of fire across the border, as you outlined, in which there have been journalists killed, a journalist killed and others wounded. I myself, at one point in my career, was a journalist, and I used to cover war zones. I'm well familiar with how these things play out, and sadly, the civilian casualties that result as a result of war. This is war that's happening.
Absolutely, indeed. And at this moment, let's talk a bit about the captives that Hamas has with them. There are at least about 130 to 150. We do not know how many are still alive. Now, Israel has gone on this campaign of carrying out air raids. There is likely to be a ground incursion. Do you think Israel has got its strategy in place in trying to secure the release of the captives that are presently with Hamas?
In normal circumstances in which you have a hostage situation, there's an effort by the party that's trying to liberate them to try to isolate the civilian population around it, residents or whatever the situation, from where the action is. In the case of the Gaza Strip, and certainly where we believe these people are held. And by the way, there's talk that they've been broken up into different groups to assure that at least some of them Hamas does not lose control of, so that they can use them for whatever purposes they see fit. But the ability to do a pinpoint strike to try to liberate them is so complicated given the density and the population center that is the reality of large swaths of the Gaza Strip. So it is so complicated, and to have some sort of sense that the Israelis know where their people, their citizens are held is just unrealistic. You can't for everybody. And yeah, as you pointed out, we don't even know how many are still alive.
At this moment, do you think, under what circumstances will the Israelis negotiate to first secure the release of the captives that Hamas has with them? Do you think they'll negotiate at all, or do you think it's going to be a military strategy that Israel will rely on?
Negotiations at this point, and certainly, India has, of course, the relative recent memory of what happened in Mumbai. Imagine if India suddenly started negotiating with the terrorists who caused such havoc and bloodshed in Mumbai. It's just unrealistic in the wake of such atrocities. There's just no way. The sentiment of the Israeli people, and of course a lot of the international community.
If I can just interject here, securing the release of captives is not driven by sentiment. There has to be a more workable strategy to achieve the goal that is needed. You brought in the example of India, but that was a completely different case where there was an active shooter scenario where terrorists had come in and India had to go and neutralize them. That was different. In this case, what is playing out is a completely different case. There are Hamas militants who've captured about 130 of the Israeli captives, and the people of Israel want answers for this. This is why we are seeing protests on the streets of Israel.
Look, they're apples and oranges, but then again, they're both fruit. I'm sorry to use that type of comparison, but who in the world, after your people have suffered great losses, blood, horror, terror, is in the mood to negotiate with a terrorist group? It's just not going to happen from the Israeli perspective. It's insane to even consider such a thing. And, yes, they are different scenarios, but at the end of the day, if they're both considered terrorist attacks by the people who have been on the receiving end of the activity. So it's just impossible to have that type of expectation. Now, there can be Israeli negotiations which are happening now in trying to figure out what role Egypt can play in helping to relieve some of the humanitarian catastrophe that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip. Don't forget that Egypt controls the Rafah crossing. But the problem there also is that Egypt itself has been dealing with insurgents in the Sinai, which is the portion of Egypt that borders on Gaza Strip, in which scores of Egyptian civilians, soldiers and policemen have been killed by ISIS-aligned and Muslim Brotherhood-aligned militants there. And Hamas is an organization that was born out of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Egyptian government is very wary of having some sort of deal that would involve giving safe refuge and allow Hamas to operate on its territory or to manipulate the situation in the Sinai.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much, indeed, Mr. Wattle, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
You're welcome.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.